Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. It was something I had dreamed of doing for a very long time. Finally, the opportunity presented itself, and I didn't hesitate. If only I had known. The place I visited is open to the public, offering both guided and self-guided tours of the extensive grounds. Believe me, it's enormous. After making my reservation, I packed my supplies and headed out. Upon arrival, I was greeted by a friendly tour guide. I mentioned that I was a horror author and former corrections officer, so my focus would be on the old and new sections of the prison. He was very accommodating, pointing out areas that matched my interests. I marked my map with notes about photo opportunities and planned my route. Then, I was asked to sign in on a clipboard, which had a space for signing out. "Do you ever lose anyone?" I joked. He chuckled, though it felt more nervous than genuine. "Oh, you'd be surprised," he replied. I thanked him and turned to leave, but he stopped me with one last warning. "The building's marked in black," he said, his face paling slightly. "Don't go inside those. Don't even get close." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "You don't want to know. Let's just say it's dangerous." I walked away from his cryptic response and began my tour. The first building was stunning, resembling a French chalet more than a prison. Built from stone, it looked surprisingly well preserved, as though it could stand for another century or more. I pulled out my camera and phone, snapping basic pictures with the phone and using the camera to create eerie, atmospheric shots. The bright, cloudless sky made the building seem inviting, but I adjusted my camera settings to give it the look of a haunted castle. Stepping inside, I was greeted by a dim foyer that led into a large open room, its brick floor complemented by stone archways along one wall. The archways were curious, seeming to lead nowhere. Either they were purely decorative, or their destinations had long since been blocked off. Turning, I faced the first of many shadowy hallways. This was the path I intended to take. Leaving the grand room behind, I ventured down the corridor, capturing photos as I went. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the years of neglect. The hallway was lined with newer metal doors, each fitted with glass windows, nearly all of which were shattered. Either vandals had been through or something else had caused the damage. One room stood out. Its solid metal door was fitted with bars, giving the first hint of the building's past as a prison. Inside, the paint was peeling, but there was no bunk or other indication it had been used for long-term confinement. At the end of the hall, I faced a choice: a staircase leading both upward and downward. Opting for a higher vantage point, I grasped the railing cautiously, half expecting it to pull free from the wall. Surprisingly, it held, though my hand came away coated in years of accumulated grime. I stared at the dirt, wondering how long it had waited there for someone like me. The upper level rewarded me with sweeping views of the grounds and significantly more decay. One room contained a drooping ceiling fan, its blades warped, as if melted. The sight made me chuckle, but my laughter echoed back in an unfamiliar voice. I dismissed it as an odd acoustic effect and pressed on. At the end of the hallway, I found a staircase descending to another floor. This one had a metal grate door. I recalled the rules the guide had mentioned. Don't open closed doors and don't close open ones. When I'd asked why, he had hesitated before offering a nervous smile and replying, "Because we might not have the key to reopen it, and it could take a while." Bearing that in mind, I carefully descended the staircase, passing the floor I'd just explored. Having already seen the upper floors, I headed down to the basement. The musty smell of decay hit me immediately. While the cool air was refreshing on a day with temperatures climbing into the 90s, it carried an unsettling sense of foreboding. The basement was in far worse condition than the rest of the building. No ceilings remained intact. Everyone had already collapsed. The few stubborn patches of paint clinging to the walls seemed to be losing their fight against gravity. Light was scarce as there were fewer windows, and when I turned a corner, I was plunged into total darkness. My breath hitched as I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam should have brought comfort, but instead the small circle of light felt surrounded by an oppressive darkness that seemed to press in, threatening to swallow it. I took a few hesitant steps into the shadowy corridor, my flashlight sweeping across the crumbling walls. Then the light landed on something that made me pause. Red letters painted on the wall. They formed a single word: help. Whether this message was a relic from the prison's operational days or a mark left by a vandal was impossible to tell. I couldn't even determine if it was a plea for help or an offer to give it. Either way, the cryptic message unnerved me. I left it behind and continued deeper into the hallway. As I walked, a sudden gust of cool air caught my attention. Turning, I saw a long, unlit corridor with no doors, just a series of pipes running along the walls. I checked my map and discovered that a tunnel was noted in this building, though the map gave no indication of where it led. Deciding I'd seen enough of this part of the basement, I made my way into the dark tunnel. The air was damp, and the peeling ceiling hung lower than in the rest of the building. As I moved forward, the space seemed to shrink. Before long, I had to stoop to avoid brushing against the grimy ceiling. The further I went, the more claustrophobic it became. Up until this point, I had only encountered 3 other people, 2 on a different path near this building and 1 leaving as I entered. In the tunnel, however, I was utterly alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my footsteps, which echoed back unnervingly. Combined with the narrowing passage, my mind started to play tricks on me. The echoes began to resemble other footsteps, making me stop several times and whip around, shining my flashlight back down the tunnel. Each time, I found nothing but empty darkness. Despite my growing unease, curiosity drove me onward. Though the walk couldn't have lasted more than 15 minutes, it felt far longer in the suffocating dark, my small beam of light the only guide. I passed side rooms and alternate tunnels, but ignored them, staying focused on the main path. Eventually, I spotted a sliver of light ahead. Relief washed over me at the thought of reaching the literal light at the end of the tunnel. Just then, a sound behind me stopped me in my tracks. This time, it wasn't my imagination. It wasn't an echo either. I had been standing still. The sound was distinct, like a rock being dropped. I swung my flashlight back, but the beam revealed nothing. No rock, no movement, just the same empty tunnel. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned and moved toward the light with newfound urgency, my steps quickening. Before long, I emerged into a laundry room. Industrial washers and dryers stood in disrepair, their glass doors shattered. The room was brightly lit, and beyond it was an open exit. Stepping outside, I was greeted by the sweltering heat and blinding sun. I took a deep breath of fresh air, then immediately started to sweat. Pulling out a water bottle, I took a long drink while surveying my surroundings. Nothing looked familiar. Confused, I pulled out my map and studied the nearby buildings. To my surprise, I realized I had walked nearly the entire length of the property. Starting at the southernmost border, I had somehow ended up near the northern edge. Shaking my head in disbelief, I glanced around and decided where to go next. To my left was the mess hall, and I was eager to take pictures of it. For my current ghostwriting assignment, I turned left and entered the building with high expectations. But reality quickly clashed with them. Instead of rows of tables, the space was entirely empty. I ventured into the kitchen and was stunned to find the smell of grease still lingering in the air, like the ghost of countless meals cooked long ago. Moving down a hallway, I heard voices echoing faintly. Feeling confident they belonged to other explorers, I continued until I reached the RHU, Restrictive Housing Unit. This was the section I was most excited about, eager to capture pictures of the cells and the recreation area for my book. The RHU recreation yard was unlike anything I'd encountered before. The bottom was enclosed by chain-link fencing, while the top was reinforced with plexiglass to prevent inmates from climbing to the ceiling. Not that it would have mattered. The top was lined with razor wire. The entire enclosure measured no more than 5 feet by 15 feet. I tried to imagine spending all my outdoor time in such a space when suddenly The sharp slam of a door echoed inside. I froze, waiting for other explorers to appear, but no one came. Tentatively, I left the recreation area and entered the RHU itself. All the cell doors were open, except for one. I strained to remember if that door had been closed when I first walked through, but I couldn't. My mind drifted to stories I'd read on the prison's website about two infamous serial killers who had been housed here, both of whom died within its walls. I wondered if either had passed away in the RHU, but quickly decided I didn't want the answer. Snapping a few photos of the cells, I moved on, perhaps more quickly than I'd intended. The next building I entered appeared to be for lower security inmates, with hallways lined by rooms lacking bars on their doors or windows. As I walked, I noticed a gray box with a red light sitting on the floor. Curious, I stepped closer, only to see a man and woman in a nearby room surrounded by equipment, video monitors, cameras, microphones, everything you'd expect on a set. Thinking I'd accidentally interrupted a film shoot, I apologized and left the building quickly. Across from that building was the chapel. I stepped inside, took some pictures, and made my way to the basement, where I found yet another tunnel. Not eager to repeat my earlier disorientation, I went back to the main building to chat with the guides. They laughed as I shared my misadventure, but were intrigued when I mentioned the man and woman with equipment. They assured me no camera crews were scheduled for the day, and didn't recall anyone bringing in such equipment. Their confusion left me skeptical. Was this a joke, a misunderstanding, or something else? They added that the building I'd seen them in was a favorite among paranormal researchers. Not wanting to dive deeper into that rabbit hole, I asked about the remaining buildings I hadn't yet explored. They marked the spots on my map for modern photo opportunities, a building containing medical equipment, and the morgue. All were along the same path, so I thanked them and set out once more. The first stop was a newer cell block D, built roughly 30 years ago as a prototype for the state's modern prison designs. Stepping inside, I immediately felt more at ease. The layout reminded me of the prison where I'd worked, though on a much larger scale. The block was shaped like a giant triangle, with the day room situated in the center, surrounded by rows of cells. I took plenty of photos, capturing the open spaces and even the cells themselves. Oddly, the tables had been removed from the day room, and the toilets and sinks were missing from each cell. It struck me as strange. Why would anyone take the toilets from an abandoned prison? While I was snapping pictures, two other explorers entered the block. I greeted them, and we struck up a conversation, comparing notes. One of them was still working in the state prison system, and it was refreshing to talk shop with someone who understood the work. After they left, I made my way to the opposite side of the block. The opposite side of the block felt like stepping into a distorted mirror image of the one I had just explored. Walking into it was unnervingly like entering another dimension. Even the air seemed heavier, as if something unseen was pressing down on it. My initial excitement waned as I approached this side. Despite the twin skylights in the ceiling of each side, this area felt darker, almost oppressive. The dimness was enough for me to pull out my flashlight to illuminate the corners and spaces the skylights couldn't reach. I shoved aside the creeping unease growing in the back of my mind and pressed on. I was here to take pictures, no matter what. Finding a cell that was slightly cleaner than the others, I snapped a few photos. To get a different perspective, I stepped inside the cell and began taking pictures facing outward into the block. As I turned to glance out the window, I noticed how much darker the sky had grown since I first entered. Then I heard it, a faint creak. Slowly turning around, I saw something impossible. The cell door I was standing inside was swinging shut, inch by inch. My mind froze. I had to be dreaming. There was no one else here. This had to be some trick of the wind, or maybe a stuck hinge finally giving way. Yet as I stood there, the door continued closing as if guided by an unseen hand. Panic overtook me as my mind replayed the warning from the guides. We don't have keys to every door. That's why you mustn't close any doors. Adrenaline surged and I lunged for the entrance, shoving my foot into the narrowing gap. The door hit my foot hard, sending sharp pain radiating up my leg. For a split second I nearly pulled back, overwhelmed by the force, but sheer desperation kicked in. Bracing myself, I shoved the door back with all my strength, slamming it open with a resounding bang as it crashed against the wall. I stumbled out of the cell and into the day room, spinning in all directions, searching for the prankster who'd set me up. I checked the first 3 cells to my right, then the 3 to my left. No one. The room was utterly empty. A cold wave of dread washed over me, turning my spine to ice. The need to flee overwhelmed every rational thought. I bolted toward the main entrance, only to find the door shut tight. I yanked and pulled with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. Frantically, I scanned for something, anything to pry it open with, but nothing useful was in sight. My gaze darted to the opposite side of the block, only to discover that door was also closed. Helplessness wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. Then a memory flickered in my mind. Earlier in the day, when I exited the tunnel, I'd noticed a side door on this building. That door had been open. Without wasting another second, I sprinted back into the block, the sensation of being pursued nipping at my heels. I didn't hesitate when I reached the side door, even though it too was shut. I slammed my shoulder into it, and relief flooded me as it gave way, creaking open. What I didn't expect were the stairs. 5 concrete steps led from the door down to the ground. I cleared them all in a single leap, landing headfirst in knee-high grass next to a tree. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, not caring about the ache in my body, just grateful to be out of that building, which had seemed determined to trap me. As I stared up at the sky, my relief was tempered by confusion. When I'd entered the block, it had been sunny and hot, nearly 90 degrees. Now the sky was shrouded in clouds, with the sun completely obscured. The world had taken on an eerie twilight hue, premature for the time of day. I couldn't have been inside for more than 20 or 30 minutes, could I? I scrolled through the photos on my phone, checking the timestamps. Sure enough, only 28 minutes had passed. How had the sky turned so dark so quickly? Pushing the unsettling thought aside, I focused on putting as much distance as I could between myself and that cursed building. I ran through the tall grass, heading toward the asphalt road that cut through the compound. Once back on the road, I paused to glance at the building, which now looked just as innocent as when I'd first entered, except for the ominous lighting. Perhaps it was the darker sky casting everything in a sinister hue, or maybe it was the memory of almost being trapped. Either way, I resolved not to return. Escape ahead of me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me onward. The main building loomed closer, its doors a beacon of safety. I bolted through the entrance, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment I leaned against it, gasping for air and trying to process everything I'd just experienced. My mind raced. Were those people still following me? Who was the man blocking my path, and how had I passed through him? The guides were still inside, chatting casually near the reception desk. Their laughter and relaxed demeanor were such a sharp contrast to the chaos I'd just endured that it felt surreal. One of them turned to me, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" he asked. I struggled to catch my breath, nodding weakly. I think I'm done for the day," I managed to say, glancing nervously over my shoulder at the door. The guide must have noticed the panic in my voice. Did something happen? I hesitated. How could I explain without sounding crazy? Just had a bit of a scare in the morgue building. I think I might have interrupted something. His face darkened slightly. Something? Like what? An autopsy, I said, swallowing hard. There was a man in a white gown, and people were gathered around watching him, but when I spoke, they all turned and I trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. The guides exchanged uneasy glances. "There's no one scheduled to be in the morgue today," one of them said. "That's impossible," I replied. "I saw them. There were at least a dozen people, maybe more." Another guide stepped closer, her voice low. "We don't have any events or teams in that area. No reenactments, no researchers, nothing. Are you sure about what you saw?" I nodded firmly. "Absolutely. And there was this man. He kept blocking my path when I tried to leave. But when I ran at him, I went right through him." Silence settled over the group. One of the guides cleared his throat. "That's not the first time someone's mentioned a man like that. We've had reports of a figure who seems to appear and disappear, always watching. People say he never speaks or moves toward them, but, well, you're not alone in seeing him." I shuddered, feeling the weight of their words. "And the morgue?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know what to tell you. If you're sure you saw what you saw, maybe it's best to call it a day." She didn't have to tell me twice. I thanked them and left the building, my nerves still frayed. Walking back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder more times than I cared to admit. Each time, I half expected to see the man or the group from the morgue trailing me, but the ground seemed empty, eerily quiet. When I reached my car, I threw my backpack into the passenger seat and climbed in, locking the doors behind me. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine's hum finally offering a sense of normalcy. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The prison buildings stood stark against the cloudy sky, their silhouettes ominous and foreboding. And then I saw him, the man from the path. He was standing at the edge of the lot, staring after me. I didn't stop. Banging started again, louder this time. The sound echoed through the empty halls of the RHU like a heartbeat, relentless and insistent. My new companion, still on the verge of tears, spoke again, her voice trembling. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure it was her?" I hesitated, unsure of how much detail I should give, but there was no point in lying. She deserved the truth. "Yes," I said softly. "I saw her on the table. There was no mistaking it." Her sobs grew louder, but before I could offer any comfort, the cell block went eerily silent. The banging had stopped, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "What's that?" she whispered. I moved closer to the door, peering through the tiny slot meant for guards to observe prisoners. The corridor outside was empty, but the hum was growing louder, reverberating through the air like an approaching storm. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely audible over the noise. "But I don't think it's good." The hum abruptly stopped, and for a moment, everything was deathly still. Then, from the far end of the block, I heard the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. They were heavy, purposeful, and impossibly loud in the silence. "Someone's coming," I whispered. "Who?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. "I don't know," I replied, pressing my face closer to the door. The footsteps grew closer, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. And then I saw him, the man who had blocked my path before. He walked slowly, his eyes locked on the cells, as though searching for something, or someone. "Is it him?" she asked. "Yes," I said, stepping back from the door. "It's him." "What does he want?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think he's here to let us out." The man stopped in front of my cell, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply stared at me, his gaze piercing and cold. Then, without a word, he reached for the door. "No," I shouted, backing away. The door swung open with a deafening creak, and the man stepped inside. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. "Stay back," I yelled, grabbing a piece of broken metal from the floor. "I don't know what you want, but you're not taking me without a fight." He didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed toward the door. "Leave," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I blinked in surprise, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "What?" "Leave," he repeated. "You don't belong here." I didn't need to be told twice. Clutching the metal shard, I edged past him and bolted out of the cell. I ran down the corridor, glancing over my shoulder to see him standing in the doorway, watching me. "Wait," the woman called from her cell. "Don't leave me here." I skidded to a stop and turned back. "Which one are you in?" "Second on the left," she shouted. I sprinted to her cell, my hands fumbling with the lock. "Hold on," I said, trying to pry it open with the shard. The man appeared at the end of the corridor, his eyes fixed on me. "Hurry," she urged. "I'm trying," I said, my hands trembling. The man started walking toward us, his footsteps echoing like a death knell. "Leave," he said again, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "I'm not leaving without her," I shouted back. For a moment he paused, as if considering my words, then he raised a hand and the cell door swung open on its own. "Go," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The woman stepped out, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Thank you," she whispered. We didn't wait to see if he would change his mind. Together we ran down the corridor and out of the RHU, the sound of the man's footsteps fading behind us. As we emerged into the open air, the prison compound seemed different, almost unreal. The buildings were shrouded in mist, their edges blurred like a fading memory. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Back the way we came," I said, grabbing her hand. "We have to get out of here before it's too late." We ran toward the main building, the path ahead of us twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. It felt like the prison itself was trying to keep us there, to trap us forever, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. Finally, we burst through the front gates and into the parking lot. My car was still there, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. "Get in!" I shouted, throwing open the driver's door. She climbed into the passenger seat and I started the engine, my hands shaking. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was standing at the gates watching us go. "Work this time," she said, her voice low and almost defeated. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the hammer. She stepped back, her eyes scanning the door, the walls, and the air around us. "Something's different now. It's like they don't want us to leave. The rules are changing." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, they?" She looked at me, her face pale and serious. "The ones who feed us, the ones who stand at the edges, watching. They're not just guards, Mike, there's something else." I didn't have time to process her words. A low rumble started, deep and guttural, shaking the floor beneath us. The walls groaned, and the oppressive air seemed to thicken, making it harder to breathe. "We have to move," I said, shoving the hammer and wedge back into my bag. Celia nodded, but her movements were slow, hesitant. "Where are we even going? Every door we've tried is locked, and the block feels like it's closing in on us." I didn't have an answer, but standing still wasn't an option. "Back to the side door," I said, motioning for her to follow me. We ran together, the rumbling growing louder with every step. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been, stretching endlessly in front of us. My legs burned, but I pushed forward, refusing to let the panic take hold. When we finally reached the side door, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. "Damn it!" I shouted, slamming my fist against the metal. Celia grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mike, look." I turned to see what she was pointing at. The corridor we had just run through was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of shadow. Shapes moved within it, dark, twisting figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. "We're out of time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled the hammer and wedge from my bag and went to work on the lock. My hands were shaking, and each hit of the hammer felt like it took an eternity. Come on," I muttered under my breath. Behind us, the shadows were closing in. The shapes within them were becoming clearer. Faces, bodies, hands reaching out. "Mike," Celia said, her voice urgent. "I'm almost there," I shouted, hitting the wedge one last time. With a satisfying clunk, the lock gave way. I threw the door open and grabbed Celia's hand, pulling her through. The air outside was cold and crisp, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat inside the block. We stumbled into the open, gasping for breath. But we weren't safe yet. The shapes from the shadows were spilling out of the doorway, their forms solidifying as they moved toward us. "Run!" I yelled, dragging Celia toward the perimeter fence. We sprinted across the compound, the dark figures closing in behind us. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. The fence loomed ahead, tall and topped with razor wire. There was no way we could climb it. "There!" Celia shouted, pointing to a gap in the fence where the wire had been cut. We dove through the opening, the sharp edges of the wire tearing at our clothes and skin. On the other side, we collapsed onto the ground, panting and shaking. The dark figures stopped at the fence, their forms shifting and flickering as they stared at us. "They can't cross," Celia said, her voice filled with relief. I didn't trust it. "Let's keep moving," I said, pulling her to her feet. We made our way to my car, which was still parked where I had left it. As we climbed inside, I glanced back at the prison. The figures were gone, and the compound was eerily still. "Do you think it's over?" Celia asked as I started the engine. I didn't answer. Instead, I put the car in gear and drove away, the prison disappearing in the rearview mirror. But even as we left it behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. I turned and stepped out into the bright sunshine, shielding my eyes as I scanned the parking lot for my car. It was right where I had left it, sitting slightly askew, as though even it had been affected by the madness I had just escaped. 5 other cars were scattered across the lot, their sun-faded paint and layers of dust a stark reminder of their owners' grim fates. I couldn't help but wonder which one belonged to the woman, Celia's victim, who wouldn't be coming back. A shiver ran down my spine. Even as I walked to my car, I felt like I was still being watched, that the prison's pull hadn't fully let go of me yet. Sliding into the driver's seat, I placed my makeshift splint across my lap and gripped the wheel with my good hand. My wrist throbbed, the crushed bones a constant searing reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. Before starting the car, I glanced back at the prison one last time. Its tall, foreboding walls seemed to loom larger than they had when I first arrived. The sun reflected off the razor wire, a cruel mockery of light in a place that had none. I thought about what the guide had said, or rather, what I thought I'd heard. "You're the only one to make it back." The words echoed in my mind. I wanted to turn around to demand answers, but I knew there would be none. The guide had clammed up as soon as I looked at him, pretending he hadn't spoken. With a deep breath, I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. As I pulled out of the lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me leave. I didn't look back again. I'm posting this story here as a warning. Sometimes places are abandoned for a reason. Not everything is meant to be explored. And if you ever find yourself drawn to an old prison that promises an authentic, spine-chilling experience, take my advice. Don't go. Because if you do, you might not come back. Or worse, you might come back and bring something with you.